Hi, and welcome to this episode of Things That Matter. It's great to be with you. I'm Brian Brodersen, and I'm here in the studio today with Jeff Jackson. And Jeff is the founder of the Shepherd Staff. And the Shepherd Staff is a ministry that helps local churches facilitate those that they send out to the mission field, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Jeff, great to have you.
Yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah,
Thanks for the invitation.
Good to be here. Jeff and I have known each other for a lot of years.
Yes, we have.
We were kind of in the same area many, many years ago, pastoring. We both gone to the mission field. You went to the Philippines and lived there for some time and did some church planting. Mm-hmm. And so tell us a little bit about what's happening, with the Shepherd Staff and just your engagement with missions and, beyond that, even to the current refugee situation, all kinds of things happening right now, right?
Yeah, there's a lot happening. And I think, from my sort of theological perspective, the missionary God who's unveiled himself in the Bible is giving the church incredible opportunities to make him known, to all nations and all peoples. So, we're blessed at Shepherd Staff in the sense that as a facilitating organization, I believe, and I think you do too, that, the local church is the primary vehicle God's created to make disciples of all the nations. Yeah. And so when I came off the field, the Lord gave me a vision for sort of a hybrid missions agency that would leave the home church in the driver's seat with sending their own and caring for them. And so as we've done that for about 17 years now, the Lord has provided us some interesting opportunities and expanded our horizons from originally within Calvary Chapel to serving a lot of other churches and their missionaries around the world. And I think one of the interesting things, you referenced it, is the idea that, the Lord's bringing the nations into our neighborhoods here in America. Yeah. And so there's this opportunity to reach across the street and around the world. Yeah,
it's amazing. Just yesterday I was visiting a refugee center in the Orange County here where we are. Mm-hmm. And the director of the center, he said, "Hey, I want to take you out for lunch afterwards." And he said, "Now, as we go out into the community," he said, "you're going to feel like you're in Iraq, not in, Orange County, California."
Absolutely.
And even though I'm a resident of Orange County and lived here many years, I didn't even know that community was there.
Yes.
And you're driving down the street and everything's in Arabic and all of these wonderful. I love Middle Eastern food.
Yes.
And so it's like, wow, I just discovered a whole new world of good culinary experiences. So, but and the Lord has done that. He's brought the mission field to us, which I'm really excited about that myself.
Yeah, and I think it's the Lord, orchestrating a lot of this. And there's been quite a bit of talk lately about and individuals and churches and organizations defining a theology of migration. Yeah. And really, taking Acts 17, 26, where Paul talks about, that the ethnic groups have come into existence and are in the location where God wants them to be according to his predetermined plan for that.
So they could seek him,
So they could seek him. Yeah. And I think what we're seeing at the greatest pace in history is that happening. Yeah. And, for a guy that works in the global missions realm, the challenge, I think, for those that are globally minded and recognize there still is a need for people to go, the nations in our neighborhoods sort of present an easy distraction. Yeah. So without intentionality of, we need to reach the nations in our neighborhoods, but there's still a need. God still calls people to go cross-culturally and go set up, live in other places incarnationally.
And one of the things, Jeff, that you've been that kind of passionate about is the cultural component of missions, to really recognize that when you're going into a different country, you're also going not just to a different geographical location, but it's really a different culture, and the necessity of being sensitive to that.
Absolutely.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, that's kind of where my heart beats. When I was in the military, I spent a year and a half in northern Japan, and my wife and I lived outside the base in a Japanese community. And it was my first exposure to living, in a cross-cultural context. Here I was in this Japanese city of 50,000 with a very low, almost no crime rate. Mm-hmm. And the way they interacted with one another and the humility, and clearly there was an honor and shame dynamic to their lives that was just intriguing to me. And it was similar to what you find in the military. There's an honor and shame culture. The military is built on honor and shame culture, but American day-to-day life is not. Yeah. And so initially I started toying around, this is even before I was a believer, with the idea of, culture shapes and molds everything. Our worldview, the way we interpret what's taking place around us. And eventually as I came to the Lord and God, gave me a grasp of Him and His Word, even the idea that the way we read and understand the Scripture is filtered through the culture that we've been raised with. And so, some pastors have a hobby horse, it's, Israel or church history or whatever. I'm sort of a culture junkie. So all things culture I'm interested in. And the reason for that is because I think I have a biblical reason. Because God is the creator of linguistic diversity and ethnic diversity, and in all of that, the glory of God's on display.
And I love that stuff too. And it's kind of like you said, it's almost like God just sort of wires this into you, where I just kind of I used to fantasize about the possibility of living in a place where I could minister to a multi-ethnic congregation, and the different cultures and all of that. And of course, the Lord sent me to London, and I was able to do that in London. And now coming back to Southern California, Orange County, the demographic has changed so much over the years. It's like, well, we're sort of getting to do that again here, and it's an important thing,
Absolutely.
Of course, one of the sort of negative things in the history of missions would have been back in the sort of the 19th century period when they would the Europeans would go into the various other nations and really bringing the gospel, but sort of bringing European culture as well, right?
Exactly, sort of civilization. As if they didn't have civilization before the missionaries got there. And there was a lot of kickback and resistance to that. In fact, in the secular realm, there's still that taking place, where anthropologists and stuff are resisting the efforts of missionaries because they changed the culture. And the reality of it is all people in all cultures, they're bound spiritually, and there's parts of their culture that need to be abandoned. Some of those cultural traits need to be, they're already in line with kingdom culture, so they need to be, fanned into a higher flame.
That's
so
great.
I love that kind of stuff.
Me too.
So
right now, where's your real focus? What's your real passion right today?
I think today my passion is it's certainly global. The unreached, unengaged people groups. That's kind of it's at the peak of my missions mountain that I care about, and keeping that keeping people informed of the reality that depending on which organization you look at, there's still close to 6,000 distinct groups of people that have never had the gospel presented to them in a way they can understand, or a functioning church among them. So I think that's always a high priority for me. And then back from that is just seeing churches take seriously the need to send their own and care for them.
And it's not always like you would sort of think it would be or expect it to be, that that all pastors would just understand that this is a missionary endeavor, that God sent His Son on a mission and we're to follow suit, And a lot of times, guys aren't even thinking in those terms.
No.
And sometimes that's a little bit frustrating, for guys like us who have had that thing. But so what do you think about, sort of the next generation? I had the privilege, now 25 years ago or so of just being connected with a bunch of younger people, and of course I was younger back then as well, but of a group of young people that were willing to just leave everything behind and go. I mean, are you seeing that today with the younger generation?
No, I don't think at the same level as it was in the past, but what's interesting about it is that, at least in the missions ponds that I swim in, is that the younger generation, in a sense, have sort of rejected our generation's like individualism, independence, and so they're inherently more communal. They relationships really matter to them, and because they're not as task oriented, those young people, when God does give them a vision, are much more primed for success and engaging people. In fact, I've shared at a couple ethnic churches in Southern California about their appeal to younger generation Americans. Because what you find a lot of times in these ethnic churches is this real sense of community, that I have an identity that's my group identity is more important than my individual identity.
Yeah.
And what they're looking for that they're not finding in a lot of our typical churches, they can find in these ethnic churches.
Yeah, yeah.
And they make great missionaries, that group.
Yeah. And it's good too in the sense that, you can have, a lot of times missionaries would go just solo, they just go themselves.
Yeah.
And that can be good to
It can be good,
pioneer,
yeah,
but then, you really need a team. You need a community to
Yeah.
kind of reach a community. So.
Yeah, and I think that younger generation is primed for that. In fact, when I was in Phoenix pastoring there, and we were primarily engaged with refugees that are resettled there, and we were doing ESL at an apartment complex that was literally 98% refugees from around the world.
I heard about that.
We kept getting students, secular, unbelieving students from Arizona State University that wanted to come.
Yeah.
They have a consciousness about injustice. They want to relieve oppression. They heard about what we were doing, and there were some incredible opportunities there when they come alongside us to teach English to refugees, to then explain to them why we're doing this.
Yeah, wow.
It's pretty exciting stuff.
I love that stuff. Now, Jeff, a few years back, you kind of had a curveball thrown at you. You know, you're in the middle of all this, you're leading this missions organization, and then suddenly you get this ALS diagnosis.
Yes.
And you thought at the time, well, better sort of, wrap things up, going to be going home here pretty soon. But the Lord has sustained you.
Yes.
And honestly, when I heard that news, I was heartbroken. And then, later on when I saw you and you still seem to be doing pretty good. Then,
right, yeah.
So give us a little bit
Okay, so the upshot of it is that when I had served in the Philippines, you serve among the poorest of the poor. And suffering is a part of life. And so I had developed, in a sense, a theology of suffering, where I thought I could explain it, speak into people's lives and so forth. So I had a well-developed theology of suffering. And then in 2004, I started to have serious, weird things going on. My body got tested and was diagnosed with ALS, which is usually 100% terminal within 5 years. Yeah. So 3 different neurologists said, you're going to die, you're 45, get everything together, and there's nothing we can do for you. So it was like God said, okay, let me see how your theology works in this. And so my wife and I, we went through incredible trials in the midst of that, and God just, riveted His truth and His love for us to us in the midst of that. Well, 2.5 years later, as a result of making all these decisions, because I'm going to die, and even moving away, turning Shepherd Staff over, moving it to another state, a neurologist in Las Vegas checked me out, part of the ALS Association in Vegas, and said, I think you've been misdiagnosed. You have a different neuromuscular disease called Kennedy's disease. Wow. Spinal bulbar muscular atrophy, and it'll take the same progression of symptoms as ALS, but slower. So, your horizon's been broadened. And, eventually, 10, 12, 15 years of walking and talking probably left. So it opened the door, and through that, I was able to get involved with, actually, I went on staff immediately with John Michaels at Calvary Chapel Spring Valley, and then I wound up in Phoenix working with refugees there, and that sort of added that part of God's preordained inventory to my life, the refugee side.
So how many years has it been since the diagnosis?
So that was September of 2006.
Okay.
So it's been 10 years since the re-diagnosis to Kennedy's disease. And
how are you feeling? I mean, you seem like you're...
I'm feeling okay. I have issues, I have some throat issues. Had a lot of testing. I'm having muscles weakening in my throat at different paces, and I can't really hold anything without quivering. But I'm still, God's still got me, and I'm still able to travel. I mean, it wears me out, but it's
well, that's something that we, our listeners and viewers can be praying for you about.
Well, thank you.
So, Jeff, thanks so much for coming
pleasure.
on. What a great story. And it's not over yet.
It's not over yet.
Trusting that the Lord's going to keep doing some great things. So,
thanks, Brian.
Well, thanks for tuning in, and hope you enjoyed this episode. Jeff, if people want to find out more about what you're doing, how do they get in touch with you?
The website is SSMFI. So the acronym for Shepherd Staff Mission Facilitators, Inc., ssmfi.org. Okay. So they can go on the website there, or my email is jeffj@ssmfi.org.
Right. Okay, great. All right. Well, again, thanks for being with us, and tune in for the next episode of Things That Matter. Twitter, Facebook, all of that stuff. Social media, we're all out there. So God bless.